Welcome back to the channel, Hobby1 Kenobi here. Now I begin work on the Kinetic Mirage 2000C. Kinetic has a wide range of different versions of this aircraft, but I chose the C because I wanted to depict the aircraft in the 1980s or early 1990s. The blue-gray coloring of this jet is striking and will break up the monotony of grays found in anyone's model display cabinet. As usual, the build begins with the cockpit. Parts are removed from the sprue. I like to clip away from the part. This way I can angle the side cutters more carefully and ensure a clean cut. After removing the parts, I clean up any flash and check for pin marks that need to be removed or filled. There is a large pin mark on the cockpit wall, but this will be covered by 3D decals. The detail out of the box looks quite good, but I have decided to use Quinta Studio's 3D decals. To add the decals, some molded details must be removed. This is achieved with side cutters, an X-Acto knife, sanding sticks, and this really great tool officially called the Push Broach Combination Set by Disbay. This set comes with 5 different sized chisels, typically used for scribing panel lines. I also like to use them to scrape off material, and the blade of the chisel can be used upside down to scratch out any material. It's important to work slowly and to remove a little at a time. Try not to squeeze the piece with your other hand, since as material is removed, the pieces become more fragile. A scalpel is used to level off the surface. Then sanding sticks remove any scratches. The parts are then painted. I find with 3D decals it is best to match the cockpit color with the color of the decals themselves. I will typically take my time mixing paints to find just the right shade. A dab of the final paint color is placed next to the decals directly on the backing paper for a side-by-side comparison. Once the paint is dry on the model, I apply a coat of Mission Models gloss, then begin adding a dark wash of Artist Oils. The oils are allowed to dry, then removed with a Q-tip and an old soft brush. A small percentage of the oils are left in the crevices, depicting shadows. "3D decals are easy to apply, just please remember a few things. First, place a drop of water on the backing paper. Placing the decals directly in water isn't necessary, and the decals will start to soak up the water and expand. You just need enough water to soften the backing paper and free the decal. Use PVA white glue to adhere the decals to the part. Decals can also be attached with super glue, just use it sparingly and carefully. I spent some time thinning parts on the ejection seat. Thinning the edge of the seats adds a level of realism to the part without resorting to aftermarket resin seats. This is achieved by scraping the inside of the edges with an X-Acto knife and sanding sticks. Finally, I decided to thin out the edge of the exhaust nozzle with sanding sticks and sandpaper. I also used my favorite riveting tool. Here we are gluing the wing halves together with Tamiya Extra Thin. Once these pieces dried, I was ready to attach the wing assembly to the halves of the fuselage. As I connected the pieces together for a dry fit, I found immediately that I would be dealing with gaps at the wing roots. At first, I had attempted to fill these gaps by adding a shim to one side. The idea was to fuse plastic sheet to one side, then fill in the space between that side and the plastic piece. Then glue the wings to the fuselage, but try to leave a seam. Adding the shim was easy, but dry fitting all of the pieces again revealed that the seams were just too numerous and exacting to be completed this way. Instead, I decided to glue the wings and fill the gaps with CA glue, then later on rescribe the seams. The gaps were filled with thin CA glue and a glue looper. Glue loopers are amazing. They allow you to place a drop of glue practically anywhere, but especially inside a seam. Capillary action allows the drop to run along the inside of the seam. The whole process is accelerated with, well, super glue accelerator. Shims were needed at various points of the fuselage and wings, either to fill gaps or cover ghastly fitting pieces. I have to say I am surprised by the number of poorly fitting pieces in this kit. I understand that these kinetic kits can be a hit or miss when it comes to fit and detail. This one has unfortunately turned out to be a miss. I removed pin marks found on the inside of the intakes. I also filled in the holes for the attachment points to the small fins that reside near the intake cowlings. I didn't want these to be seen from the inside of the intake. Near the front of the port side intake is a glass window, which should have a chromate green back. I replicated this by adding sheet plastic. Next, it was time to start scribing. I used a thin piece of metal as a straight edge. This was taped into the proper location, and the Tamiya scriber was used to carefully create the seams. Since I needed to start the seam work on the intakes, I decided to paint their interior. Dry fitting the intakes showed a large seam that I again decided to fill with CA and rescribe. Next, I decided to scratch build details for the walls of the wheel wells. This detail included ribbing and various wires. I used styrene, solder wire, and Tamiya tape to depict the details. I kept this detail on the lighter side, just trying to fill a bit more of the empty spaces. Rings were added to the main wheel's struts. The plan is to send wiring through them. Vallejo plastic putty was used to fill seams all over the aircraft. Sanding may work with this product. I haven't had much luck, but I do like to fill this product into the seam, then simply wipe the excess away with a moistened Q-tip. The detail under the windshield just forward of the control panel needed to be scraped away so I could properly fill a seam. A strip of plastic was used to cover up the area. The base of the heads-up display was mounted, then thin strips of plastic were used to bring back the detail. Now it's time to paint up details on the ejection seat. I started with painting the headrest NATO black. A tan color was used to color the seat cushions. Silver and black paint was used to create variation in the details at the rear of the seat. Quinta 3D decals were used in the cockpit, and now I apply the rest on the ejection seat. I find that 3D decals have a tendency to bloat if left in too much water for too long. Rather than dropping them in water like water slide decals, I like to apply drops of water to the backing paper. This is often all that is needed to remove 3D decals from the backing paper. Finally, here is the model in its latest state. It has received a coat of primer, the base color is a light gray, and the blue-gray was used for the camo pattern. The model has received a few coats of Mission Models gloss to prepare for the decals. Each decal is soaked in water, then added to the model and moved into position. Once the decal is in the right place, I like to remove excess water and begin to press the decal with a Q-tip. Rolling the Q-tip along the decals helps squeeze out any bubbles. Bubbles that are trapped under a dried decal will create an effect called silvering. Silvering can ruin the realism of a finished model. For difficult and fragile decals, I like to use Decal Set or Tamiya Mark Fit to help the decal slide across the smooth surface. Once all of the decals were on and dried, I applied another coat of gloss over the aircraft. I paid careful attention to coat over the decals. The decals will need to be protected before a wash is applied. Without this step, the artist oils will stain the decals. The wash was created with black and white to create a very dark gray. The oils are thinned heavily with turpenoid. This wash is then applied to the vehicle. In some cases, I decided to focus on seams only, while on the underside of the aircraft, I coated the entire area. As I continue to apply the wash, I'd like to take a moment to review the kit as a whole. First, the subject needed an updated kit, and Kinetic created kits of many of the variants of the Mirage. Be prepared, however, that the kit has a lot of flaws. The first being the overall fit of parts, especially at the wing roots and the nacelles. Another issue that I encountered was that the main wheel struts had a peg that was far too small to fit in the hole provided in the wheel wells themselves. To counter this, I filled the holes with a generous amount of extra strength superglue. I'm not sure how these struts will fare as the model is transported to a contest I will be attending next weekend, but I will be crossing my fingers. Another issue was that some of the panel lines and, dare I say, rivets were not quite correct. Despite these issues, the kit will be enjoyable for a modeler with the skills to tackle these problems. After the excess wash was removed with Q-tips, a large soft brush, and paper towels, I added a few light coats of Tamiya Clear Flat. Once that was allowed to dry, I was ready to remove the masks protecting the clear plastic around the vehicle, as well as the cockpit interior. Removing this tape is one of the more rewarding moments in building aircraft models. If there was any bleed through of paint or clear coats, A softened and moistened toothpick or Q-tip will wipe it away. Finally, I began the process of adding artist oils to the final finish. Dark and light gray tones were splattered onto the fuel tanks to add variation and general wear. The splattered effect was made by flicking a brush loaded up with thinned paint against a toothpick. The effect can be manipulated with a soft brush. Next, I mixed oils to get a color that matched the light gray camo color. This paint was then added directly to the decals. The paint was then immediately wiped away, leaving the insignia slightly toned down. The brilliance of color was reduced, which added to the overall realism of the model. Next, oils were mixed to create the blue-gray color and placed also on the insignia. It's important to note that if the effect is too heavy, a Q-tip can be moistened with turpenoid to remove paint from the area. With this final step complete, the model is now finished. Thank you for joining me in this build. If you enjoyed this video, please do hit the like button and consider subscribing to the channel. Well, that does it for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.